September the 11th, 2001, 9/11. It is amazing to think that it's been nearly 20 years since that horrific moment in history. And certainly as we approach the 20th anniversary, quite naturally, we cannot help but be reminiscent of the acts of hideous and sheer evil that befell the United States on that fateful morning, but more so of the acts of tremendous heroism and sacrifice beyond comprehension that we all witnessed. Many of you responded. In fact, for just a moment, I believe we're going to bring the lights up. What we'd like to do is to have anyone here that responded to either the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, or to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, or whose departments responded. If you could please just stand for a moment so that we could recognize you. Please stand. Any of those in the audience or whose departments responded. Thank you. Thank you. Certainly, 20 years later, we still owe a debt of tremendous and immense gratitude to all of you that certainly served during that historic moment in history. Well, many others reacted locally, readying your people and your communities for ominous possibilities, and we've been readying our people and our communities ever since. And for that, too, we are certainly deeply grateful. Well, as we approach the 20th anniversary of those attacks, it's entirely fitting that our conference open with a reflective look back at 9/11, at how we've progressed as a community, as a fire service, and also a look forward. What truly should we never forget? We're joined this morning by a distinguished and very special panel of guests, a rare occasion and perhaps the first occasion where these four gentlemen share the stage together. And I'd like to take a few moments to introduce them before we have a discussion about that event and the look forward. Joe Pfeifer deserves no introduction, of course. Well, he was the first chief at the World Trade Center attack on 9/11. He also played a significant command role during Hurricane Sandy and helped manage New York City's Ebola response efforts. Joe Pfeifer retired from the New York Fire Department in 2018 as an assistant chief in charge of the Counterterrorism and Emergency Preparedness. During his career, he commanded some of the largest events in FDNY's history. He's currently a senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School, where he teaches crisis leadership and leads research teams to examine international preparedness of cities and their response to extreme events. I'd also like to make just a quick plug. He's also the author of a forthcoming book, Ordinary Heroes, a memoir of 9/11, which will be published in the days before the 20th anniversary. Thank you for being with us, Joe. Next to him is Jim Schwartz. Jim Schwartz led the unified command effort for the Pentagon incident on September the 11th. He recently retired after 5 years as the Deputy County Manager for Public Safety and Technology in Arlington, Virginia. Prior to that, he served in the Arlington County Fire Department for 32 years, the last 11 as Chief of Department. The Arlington County Fire Department, of course, was the lead agency for the response to the Pentagon on September the 11th, 2001. Jim is a senior fellow with the program on crisis leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School and teaches in the executive education programs, including Leadership in Crisis, the General and Flag Officer Homeland Security Executive Seminar, and Leadership in Homeland Security. Jim Schwartz is a member of the IAFC's Committee on Terrorism and Homeland Security, which he chaired from 2008 until August of 2014. He previously served on the Advisory Council for the Interagency Threat Assessment and Coordination Group, the ITAC-G, and subsequently the Joint Counterterrorism Assessment Team, the JCAT, at the National Counterterrorism Center. Jim graduated from the University of Maryland with a bachelor's degree in fire administration, and he is a graduate of the Executive Leaders Program at the Center for Homeland Defense and Security at the Naval Postgraduate School. Thank you for being with us, Jim. Chris Combs. Chris Combs was the initial FBI on-scene commander at the Pentagon immediately after the terrorist attacks on 9/11, and then served as the FBI representative to the Unified Command for the duration of on-scene operations. He currently serves as Special Agent in Charge, SAC, of the FBI San Antonio Field Office, a position he was appointed to in April of 2014. SAC Combs has directed numerous domestic and international critical incidents throughout his career. He served as the FBI representative to the Unified Command at the U.S. Capitol during the anthrax mail attacks in 2001. He was also FBI agent in charge for the Sutherland Springs active shooter, the Odessa active shooter, and the Austin serial bomber. He served as the FBI's operations section chief for numerous terrorist incidents to include the Holocaust Museum shooting, the Pentagon shooting, and the Luna restaurant bombing in Pakistan. He's also a senior fellow with the Ash Center at Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and prior to joining the FBI, S.A.C. Combs was a volunteer firefighter for 8 years with Freeport, New York, and New Berlin, Wisconsin fire departments. Thanks for being with us, Chris. And last but not least, we have also Sal Cassano. Salvatore Cassano served as the 32nd Fire Commissioner in the 149-year history of the New York City Fire Department, leading the nation's largest fire department. Commissioner Cassano spent 44 years in the FDNY and held every uniformed rank prior to his appointment. He served as Chief of Operations, a position to which he was appointed immediately after September 11, 2001. Commissioner Cassano played a crucial role in rebuilding the department in the wake of September 11th. And under his leadership, the FDNY became better equipped, better trained, and better prepared than ever before in its history. The Commissioner is an Army Vietnam veteran, and he graduated from John Jay College with a degree in fire science. He holds an honorary Doctor of Law degree from St. John's University, and in 2009 was awarded France's highest decoration, the Légion d'honneur, by French President Sarkozy. Commissioner Cassano grew up in Brooklyn and is a lifelong resident of New York City. He and his wife Teresa reside in Staten Island, and they have 5 children and 9 grandchildren. Well, it's probably not possible to have a closer, more personal perspective of the initial impact of 9/11, the initial command decisions, and that event's impact on leadership within our profession, as well as how we've progressed since. Let's have a discussion this morning. Good morning. Okay, thank you first for being with us this morning. We appreciate your being together with us to share your experiences, your perspectives on that morning. And what we're going to first do is to take you back to September the 11th, 2001. It's 8:46 a.m. Now we know, Joe, you were at the corner of Lispenard and Church Streets, just 14 blocks north of the tower. And you were there with, I believe it was Jules Naudet, filming a documentary that morning. Now, you actually witnessed American Airlines Flight 11 crash into floors 93 through 99 of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. You were the first chief on scene and the first incident commander at the North Tower. If you would, talk to us about your experience in that moment, what you saw, what you thought. What would you like to share with this audience?
Sure, Mike. That morning we were standing at an ordinary gas leak in the street. I was there with 2 engines and 2 trucks. And then at 8:46, we heard a loud roar of jet engines. And as you all know, in Manhattan, you never hear planes because of the tall buildings. And then we see this American airliner plane so close that I could read the words on the fuselage, pass us. And then I saw the plane aim and crash into the World Trade Center. And at that moment, I told the guys to go to the Trade Center, and I got on the radio and transmitted a second alarm. But there was hundreds of thoughts going through my mind because I knew that I was going to be the first incident commander, at least initially. So I had to slow my thinking down a little bit. And as you heard in that video, I got on the radio again, and I said that the plane was aiming for the building, and now I transmitted a third alarm. And as I took command, firefighters came in, paramedics, EMTs, police officers, fire marshals. And you would expect there'd be a lot of noise, but they came in quietly. Because every first responder that went in that morning looked at the burning towers, and they made a personal decision to go in. They knew they were going to the most dangerous jobs of their lives. And I remember one lieutenant coming up to me without saying a word. And we looked at each other, wondering if we were going to be okay. And then I ordered that lieutenant, as I've ordered many other fire officers, to take their company and go up. And that officer turned around, as many others did, and went upstairs. And as they went up, they did some ordinary things. As they were going up, people were coming down. And they told people, don't stop. You can make it out of here. And we know that those words meant a lot. Then a little bit before 9 o'clock, I gave another order to evacuate the South Tower that wasn't hit. And the fire safety director called over. But things were moving very quickly that morning. And then I heard a loud roar of jet engines again.
It's now 9:03 a.m. Now we know at that moment United Airlines Flight 175 crashes into the 75th through the 85th floors of the South Tower before the eyes of millions of viewers, and of course many of us were watching, certainly horrified, 17 minutes after that first attack. Now Sal, you're now on scene at this incident, so we'd like you to tell us what you saw, what were your thoughts, what would you like to share with our guests this morning?
I had responded from headquarters in my vehicle. I was parking opposite the North Tower, coming down from the north, looking for the command post. As I get out of my car, I hear a loud roar, and thinking it's a secondary explosion, I look up, debris raining down upon me, and I ducked into a garage just till it stopped. And then I realized that the South Tower had been hit. I made my way along West Street to find the command post, and came upon a command post that was located on the island. We decided to move it closer to a building across the street. Debris was raining down. Unfortunately, there were people jumping, and we knew that we were in a bad spot. We moved closer to the building, which has a garage entrance, so that if something happened and we needed to make an escape, we could go right down the ramp and have the protection of the World Financial Center. With that, I meet up with Chief Pete Gansey. He had come out to the command post, and I decided I was going to work with, he decided we were going to work together. We were going to cordon off the North Tower command post, the South Tower command post, and to throw in, we had the Marriott Hotel, which was fully booked with over 900 people in it. And that was another concern we had beside the possible thousands of people that we knew were going to be in the North and the South Tower. So we cordoned off those three sectors. And with that, I made my way down West Street, went into the Marriott Hotel, got a recap of the units that were there, gave orders to one of our chiefs, Chief Tom Galvin, who eventually became our chief of training, and told me we have to get everybody out of here. Worked pretty closely with the fire safety directors in that building. And as I was there, we had companies coming in as well, making their way into the South Tower. We knew this was going to be the worst day of our life. We knew that people were not going to make it home. And everybody that we gave an order to, as Joe said, looked at us in the eye, took that order, and went about their business. Everyone. We told them, be careful, be safe, Godspeed. I made my way back to the command post, talked to Chief Gansey, gave him a recap of what we had. On my way back to the command post, I meet up with Father Michael Judge. We looked at each other. We had worked together when I was the commander of Manhattan. And I said, Father Mike, we're in for a bad day. We're going to need a lot more chaplains here. With that, I made my way back to the command post.
Thank you, Sal. It's 9:37 a.m. at this point, and we know 231 miles to the south, 51 minutes roughly after the initial attack, American Flight 77 crashes and explodes into the western facade of the Pentagon. Now, Jim, we know that you were the first on scene at roughly 9:48, followed 1 minute later by SAC Combs. Jim, if you would, tell us what your initial thoughts were, of course, digesting what was taking place in New York, what your actions were at that moment at the Pentagon.
Yeah, so I had the benefit of seeing those images in New York and using them, to sort of form my thoughts. We had taken some steps with New York unfolding to get all of our apparatus back in their normal response areas. Thinking that if New York was hit, perhaps Washington, D.C. or the National Capital Region might be next. And so a few minutes, into all of this communication with our communications center, getting straight, some of the things that we were looking at. One of the units heading back from our training academy was heading up Interstate 395, Engine 101. And Engine 101 sees an airplane go across their field of vision in the windshield and go down. The captain of the engine couldn't see exactly where it went down, but he reported it to have gone down in the vicinity of the 14th Street Bridge, which is the bridge that connects Arlington to the District of Columbia. And as it happens, the Pentagon is just to the southwest of the 14th Street Bridge. Interestingly, that captain, Steve McCoy, also included in his radio report to notify the FBI, which I think was an indication of a lot of the training and relationship building that we had done with Chris and the Bureau. So I'm already focused on, this is an intentional act and it's coming in waves, based on the images I see in New York. And now what I know as I roll down into the south parking lot of the Pentagon, where I am confronted with thousands of people that occupy that building. The building on any given day has a capacity of 25 to 26,000 people. It's a city unto itself, and thousands of them are streaming out of the building. Casualties are beginning to cover the west lawn. Our first units have already arrived. I've been listening to the radio transmissions as I head towards the Pentagon. Truck 105 is the first to arrive and is taking quick action to set up a tactical action plan. The officer in charge is giving orders and has actually called for 2 additional alarms, essentially emptying the resources of the Arlington County Fire Department. But we know that because we work in such a regional system that we are going to be backstopped in our automatic aid system by people from all around the National Capital Region. When I first get into South Parking, I am confronted with fire and smoke hundreds of feet in the air, and one of the first images that catches my attention is the crash fire rescue vehicle from the Fort Myer Fire Department, which at the time was on helicopter standby. It is completely destroyed as a result of the airplane striking the building. One of my first thoughts was, where are those firefighters? Because I didn't have a quick handle on that. As it turned out, they had run for their lives literally from the unit, and then once the crash happened, went back and tried to get the unit operational to do the best that they could, but were unsuccessful. I then came in contact with Battalion Chief Bob Cornwell. Bob was a 35-year veteran at that point, back to work for the first time in months after receiving cancer treatments, but he still didn't have any hair. But my confidence in Bob and his knowledge of the Pentagon and that area of the county told me I knew I wanted him to lead our first search and rescue efforts into the building. And so Bob and I conferred. I took command from him and gave him the resources and began that. And then shortly after that, Chris and I have our first communication, and we are quickly joined by the chief of the then Defense Protective Service, what passes as the police department back then for the Pentagon. John Jester was well known to us because we had worked together on a lot of projects in the region. And John came up to Chris and I and immediately started to give us what he knew was going on inside the building. It was then that we learned that the airplane had penetrated the outer 3 rings of the Pentagon. It wasn't just that outer ring, that surface. It had gone actually all the way into 3/5 of the building. And he was giving us what he knew by way of situational awareness. And it was from there that we started to build our plans, which were, quite frankly, quite quickly disrupted by both the collapse of the building and subsequently the report of that 4th airplane.
Thank you very much, Jim. Now, Chris, we know that, of course, Jim was there close by and responded to the event. Let us know where you were and what your initial actions were when you arrived on scene roughly 1 minute after Jim's arrival.
Sure. Actually, that morning, I was with all the fire department rescue companies in the D.C. area because we were preparing for massive protests coming to the World Bank and IMF. So it's kind of a good start of the day where we were all together. The FBI was already with the fire rescue companies getting ready for that. When New York happened, I was on an FBI rapid counterterrorism team. We initially had orders to deploy to New York immediately. And while we were reconstituting is when the plane hit the Pentagon. So we were there within 6 minutes. Luckily, because we had done so much work together in the NCR, we had trained fire, police, FBI. We had been training for years for an event like this. Within 15 minutes, we had a functional unified command. We were all standing there together. Again, by God's grace, the Saturday before 9/11, we'd actually had a full-scale field exercise where hundreds of us, fire, police, FBI, were together in Fairfax County. So when we actually get to the Pentagon and we get our unified command together, it's literally the same people that we were with on Saturday. We knew how to do this. We were able to institute the plans very quickly. What was nice about that partnership was we knew how to operate with life safety issues and obviously the FBI concerns with a terrorist attack. But my mind, not just at the Pentagon, but was very quickly to knowing what happened in New York, that this was actually not just a terrorist attack, but an act of war, and became concerned about the rest of the city and our requirements within the District of Columbia and additional attacks that we felt were coming. At that point, we didn't know about the 4th plane yet, but immediately that was my concern with Jim was how do I get him the intelligence that I know is coming out of FBI headquarters about further attacks that we anticipated to receive in the city.
Yes, and with that, just we know that in those initial moments you were receiving information from other sources. Could you talk to us about where that information was coming from, what it consisted of, and how it fed into your command decisions?
So as I was in Unified Command, I had communication back to our command post, which is directly connected to FBI headquarters in Washington, the SIOC, where the FAA is sitting, where all the intelligence agencies sit during a crisis. So they were feeding to me the intelligence that we saw nationwide, and what I was being fed was everything else that was going on. So I'm not sure everybody knows this, but what happened when the FAA closed that airspace, a number of international carriers that were coming across the Atlantic, because of the language barrier, they started transmitting hijack. So we had 8 additional jumbo jets coming across the Atlantic that was squawking hijack to us. So I was passing that to Jim. And then we knew that the 4th airplane, the one that ends up crashing in Shanksville, when that was hijacked and turns around over Ohio and comes back, the FAA was transmitting to the FBI, which to me was, you have a confirmed hijack, it's just turned around over Ohio, you have 17 minutes till it's gonna hit. So I grabbed Jim and I said, Jim, we got a confirmed hijack, it's 17 minutes out from Washington. And what was important there is because we had that relationship and we had done so much work together, there was no question about it. You know, he looked at me, like, what are we gonna do? We both said, hey, we gotta start pulling people out of here. Yes. Because, you know, we had both seen 2 planes hit the World Trade Center, so we assumed both planes were coming to the Pentagon, and we made the decision we have to evacuate the scene immediately to save the first responders.
Thank you very much. And first, I'd like to just mention that the tremendous relationship that the IAFC and the Fire Service enjoys with the FBI can largely be attributed to the efforts of this man right here, S.A.C. Combs. And we're grateful for that, as you can see in the actions before the attack on the Pentagon, and also certainly what took place with Unified Command. Probably no better example of contemporary Unified Command than what we saw there on 9/11. Any additional comments with respect to the Unified Command, your establishment of objectives and so forth, any others that contributed to how things ran that morning?
Mike, one thing that I would add is that, we all hear about, in popular culture and so forth, the term fog of war, which absolutely was what we were dealing with in the initial stages of this. Information was, somewhat sporadic. You're here, as Chris was just mentioning, 8 other aircraft. So there's a lot going on to process and try and churn through. When that airplane didn't materialize as we had anticipated, the report that came back to us was that it had crashed into Camp David, the president's weekend retreat up in Western Maryland, which obviously just added this layer of complexity to what we were dealing with. I think the other thing not to be lost in this portion of the chronology is that when we evacuated, and obviously among the other things that we moved was the command post, and the command post was moved underneath the overpass from Interstate 395. And once we got there and we were doing this countdown, anticipating this other airplane, and when that threat had passed and we ordered everybody back to the Pentagon, Chris insisted that the command post stay there because because he was thinking about security for our command element, where what else is out there, what's coming our way, and so the command post stayed for the remainder of the day there underneath the overpass and had a security perimeter that again, not the typical thing that you do at a house fire or a hazardous materials incident. So just added to the complexity.
Understood. Thank you very much. It's now 9:59 a.m. A horrific moment never before witnessed, of course, takes place as the world watches the collapse of the South Tower. Roughly some 4 minutes later at 10:03, hijackers deliberately crash a plane into the field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Of course, United Airlines Flight 93, killing all 40 passengers and crew aboard. And some 25 minutes later, the North Tower collapses. It's now 10:28 a.m., a mere 102 minutes after the first attack. But let's go back to the collapse of the South Tower, and perhaps your perspectives in that moment. What were your thoughts as you were digesting or beginning to comprehend the magnitude of this event?
We had a lot less information in New York, but at 9:59, I heard another sound. It was a loud rumbling sound. If you ever stand underneath a train trestle and a train comes along and it gets louder and louder and then dissipates, that's exactly what it sounds like. So I'm at the North Tower in the command post. I hear this rumbling sound, and I had to make a decision. And I had about 1 second to do that. And not even thinking that an entire 110-story building could collapse, I thought maybe something from the plane fell off from the upper floors into the lobby, or the elevators were blowing out from part of the debris. I thought we were the only ones in danger. And I quickly moved to my left to a little alcove, maybe as far as the fire bell. And I pushed some others in front of me. And then the entire lobby goes completely black, where I couldn't see the hand in front of my face. And at that time, I was a battalion chief. I had a deputy chief above me, Pete Hayden, and assistant chief, Joe Callan, who was in charge of the North Tower. And Chief Callan said, "We got to get out of here. We got to get out of here." And that was a good decision, because we couldn't command in complete darkness. But I was in this tower hundreds of times, and I knew how to get out, to go up an escalator to a pedestrian walkway across West Street, a 6-lane highway to the World Financial. What that allowed me to do was take less than a minute to just think. And if we had to get out of here, I knew I had to pull our firefighters out. And I got on the radio and I said, "Command to all units in Tower 1, evacuate the building." And I heard that message being relayed up. But what you saw on TV, we did not see. I had no idea that a skyscraper just collapsed. And then I felt somebody at my feet. I took my aide's flashlight and the light from Jules's camera. I asked him to shine, and I bent down. And at my feet was our fire department chaplain, Michael Judge, that Sal was talked to just a little earlier. See, Father Judge was in the lobby of the North Tower with me. And with Father Judge, and Sal will tell you this, that he comes to these big fires and he's around the command post and he gives you this little Irish smile. "Okay, Chief, you're doing okay." And it's like, all right. But that morning, there was no smile. I saw our chaplain praying, moving his mouth, asking God for this event to pass. But when I bent down in the darkness, I removed his white collar. I checked for a pulse and for the breathing, and there was none. Our beloved chaplain was gone. Some of the people I was with started to carry him. I said, "I'll find a way out." And I walked across this bridge, got on the radio and said, "Battalion 1 to Division 1. Battalion 1 to Division 1, and I got no answer. So I walked all the way back with the guys I was with and actually made contact with Chief Hayden and others who was carrying Father Judge. Now I walk back across this bridge again, and a lot of time is being used up. And there's only 29 minutes between collapse. And I walk to the corner of West and Vesey, opposite the North Tower. And I see our command post gone, but nobody's there. But at the corner, I run into Sal. And we started to talk.
Now just to consider, roughly 102 minutes from the time of the first attack until the collapse of the South Tower. And so that's roughly just tad over the amount of time from the beginning of this conference to this moment right now. So consider that amount of time that's passed. Now it's 10:28 a.m. And of course you two have a few words. Bring us to what your thoughts were as you're digesting the magnitude, the immensity of what's taking place in this moment.
When the South Tower collapsed, prior to me meeting Joe, we all took refuge in the garage that we had thought we would go to in case there was a catastrophic event. And as Joe mentioned, this loud roar, cloud of dust. We escaped into the garage. Myself, Chief Gansey, some of the command staff that was at the command post. And pitch black, can't see, can't breathe. And we hold our ground until it clears up a little bit. And we make our way back up to where the command post was originally, which wasn't there anymore. Chief Gansey looks at me and he said, "Sal, get the command post further north, get it up to Chambers and West." He's looking up at the North Tower knowing that this thing could come down. He says, "I need some rescue, additional units I'm going south to lead the rescue effort. If any of you out there know Chief Peter Gansey, you can understand he was going to lead by example, knowing this was the worst day of our lives. We know we had people trapped, firefighters for sure, as well as the civilians. Pete was going to go lead that rescue effort. So he gives me that instruction. He heads south. I turn around, I meet up with Joe, Chief Peter Hayden. They tell me Father Judge is dead. I had just talked to him a few minutes before that. And I give him the orders that Chief Gansey says, we got to move this command post up north, clear the area, make sure the North Tower is being evacuated, which Joe said was already in the process. They make their way up, start to make their way up north with our Chief of Safety as well, Al Torrey. I turn around, I start to make my way south to go back and work with Chief Gansey again to be like his aide. 10:28, loud roar. I think it's another plane coming in until I look up and I see the antenna from the North Tower collapsing into the building. With that, we all start to try to seek shelter. There was an apparatus on the corner of West and Vesey. I dive under that apparatus and survived the collapse.
I was on that same corner, only, I don't know, feet apart as you were going south. And I heard that loud roar again. But this time somebody yelled, "The building is collapsing." So I started to run up Vesey Street towards the Hudson River. And I was there with Jules, and Jules was in his sneakers and jeans and a t-shirt, and he ran a lot faster than I did. I was in my full bunker gear, helmet, coat, boots, pants. And you don't run too far with the equipment in 11 seconds. And I see Jules crouched down behind a small van. And what would any one of us do? I'm in my protective gear, so I jumped on top of him to protect him, which seemed like a good idea at the time, until we heard the steel crashing all around us. And then this beautiful summer morning that was so filled with sunshine goes completely dark. It's one thing being inside a building when it goes dark. We've all been at fires when that has happened. There's a whole different feeling when you can't see the hand in front of your face and you're outside. And then all the chatter on the radio and all the noise of the crashing goes silent. It was like a new snowfall, that quiet, muffled sound. And for a few seconds, we wondered if we were still alive. And then the dust started to clear, and we stood up. And those of us who survived started to walk back to the collapsed buildings. And I guess it looked like we were covered with heavy dust, this gray dust. And as we stood around the edge of the collapse, we must have looked like stone statues. As we looked onto a rubble pile of twisted steel and crumbled concrete.
Thank you, Joe. Well, we know we could talk for hours about 9/11, the actions and leadership demonstrated by these men. For a moment, we're going to pivot now and take a look at the time that's elapsed since 9/11 until now, particularly with a view to how this event impacted each of you and perhaps more broadly, how 9/11 certainly changed the way we look at our role in protecting our communities and our role in working with our partner agencies across disciplines and levels of government. So let's first start with you, SAC Combs. With the FBI, how did 9/11 fundamentally change the way the government and we in public safety think about our role in protecting our communities?
I think the biggest change is it really forced the federal government across the spectrum to work closer with our state and local partners. Before 9/11, there were a handful of joint terrorism task forces. Since then, we now have over 100. Pretty much every major city in the country has a joint terrorism task force. And what it forced us to do, and this started really in '95 with the Oklahoma City bombing, but obviously 9/11 really drove that point home, was how important it was for the FBI in particular to work with the fire service, to work with our local partners, so that we could respond together, we can share that intelligence, and help you all who were there first on any scene make the best decisions you can, be the safest you can. And right after 9/11, for those of us in the Washington area, we rolled right into the anthrax attacks. And it just keeps rolling forward. And what it's really done is it's embedded us, I think, with the fire service. You never would have had an FBI guy at this conference before that. We're working hard. We're on the terrorism committee with IAFC. We're working really hard to get more fire departments on the joint terrorism task forces to share that intelligence. And it's really brought us together. So if there's any positive that could come out of that tragedy, I think the best positive is what we're doing now, where we really are together. We're sharing as much as possible.
Thank you very much. And Jim, just a quick note. We know you've also had some responsibilities in the emergency management realm. Any perspectives on how 9/11 changed how we look at emergency management and the fire service and emergency management working together in addressing problems and novel events?
Yeah, well, I would say that to begin with, emergency management, starting soon after 9/11, I think began to get its professional due. In Arlington, as I think many of our colleagues here probably have experienced or may continue to experience, emergency management is oftentimes a program within the fire department or the police department. And I think, the recognition that it has to be a co-equal with the other public safety and public health agencies has become more the norm in a lot of places. It certainly was in Arlington. The professionalization of emergency management, I think, has really, we've seen that in 20 years. I remember when we were going to take it out of the fire department and started as its own independent agency, and I was the first director of the agency, but I was going to leave that and go back to the fire department. And I remember calling Ellen Gordon. Many of you may know Ellen, a longtime emergency manager in the state of Iowa. And I said, Ellen, where are the up and coming emergency managers? Who do I look to take over this? And she said, Jim, they don't exist. They'll be there in years to come, but they don't exist right now. I think moreover, what the experience of 9/11, and we've touched on this in little ways, but what I think it was really revealed importantly is that there are incidents that we find ourselves confronted with for which we don't have all of the expertise or all of the resources necessary to effectively bring them under control. We need the partnerships of our law enforcement brothers and sisters, our emergency management professionals, what we've just seen in the last year and a half, our public health folks, our hospitals. So the recognition that while we may operate in an environment of, in the fire and EMS service, routine emergencies, in which most days we're going to the things that we know really, really well, the things that we've got standard operating procedures for. There are incidents like 9/11, like anthrax, certainly like the pandemic, that throw at us a situation in which we don't have everything we need within our own organization. And so acknowledging, one, that there is a system that has to function at a high level. And that system, like all systems, means that there are interdependencies. There are things that we contribute, but things that we also gain from these relationships. I think is a really big, that's that's where we find ourselves today when we are confronting some of the scale and complexity that incidents occasionally throw at us.
Yes, thank you. As you can tell by that response, Jim is certainly an academic. And a common thread, in fact, that was mentioned in the bios, Joe, Jim, and Chris are all three senior fellows at Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And so I know you participate in the Leadership in Crisis program as well as other programs. And so just very briefly, how did 9/11 change the way we think as leaders? Or how did it change the way we should think as leaders? And I'll allow either of the three of you to comment on that, or perhaps more than one of you. Comments, Jim, perhaps again?
Yeah, I think again, I think it's the importance of relationships. It's the importance of we talk about this sometimes at the Kennedy School. It's important for us to practice empathy. And when I say empathy, what I'm meaning is that if we acknowledge that our ultimate success is dependent on the relationship that we have with others, then it's important for us in the forging of that relationship to be able to look at a particular problem through the eyes of a partner. I've said this for now 20 years. On 9/11, standing on the west side of the Pentagon, if you had a police officer and a firefighter standing next to each other looking at those images, they were looking at the same images, but how they processed them was the result of their professional acculturation, their professional training. And the way for us to bridge those natural divides is to think for a few moments at least that your view isn't the only one, that is being expressed here. And what exactly are those people that I'm so dependent on? What are they seeing? What are they thinking? What are they trying to achieve in this same crisis?
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, let me break it down like this, because I'm still a firefighter at heart. And I talk about it, whether it's in the firehouse or for the last 20 years or at the Kennedy School, about 5 C's. And I use 5 because I only have 5 fingers and I got to use my other hand to count, and I'm not using my toes. That's out. So first 2 C's is command and control, and we know all that. We don't have to talk about it. The incident management system. But I will tell you, it's because of Chris and Jim and what they did at the Pentagon that was so different than what was happening at New York, is why we have the National Incident Management System. But leadership is about more than that. It's about connecting to each other by voice, video, and data. I would have loved to have 10 seconds of video that morning to see what you saw. But now we work through 20 years where we have live feed video, not only from police helicopters, but also from the news helicopters. And we could connect to data sources. That's incredibly important. The next is to collaborate, and Jim spoke about empathy, and I call it crisis empathy. Looking through somebody else's eyes. And that's more important now than ever. With active shooters, instead of coming up to a police chief and say, "Hey, I'm Joe Pfeifer, I'm from the fire department," and I actually have done this at an active shooter thing we've had in New York, I go up and say, besides shaking their hand and saying who I am, to say, "Yeah, I understand this is a dangerous situation, and you're sending your officers in. But we're going to be here, and we're going to do this together, because I have my paramedics standing by in case one of the officers gets hurt. We're going to go in." That's a whole different way. So we got connect, collaborate, and the other one is to coordinate. And it's what you're hearing up here. I don't want to see a whole bunch of fire chiefs surrounding me. I want to see law enforcement. I want to see our medical folks and many others. So to coordinate is about diversity. I want to see other agencies, and I want to be within arm's distance of each other, literally. Because not only can I hear what the other person is saying, but I could watch the body languages. So those are my 5 C's: command and control, connect, collaborate, and coordinate.
Thank you for that, Jim. Or Joe, pardon me. And so another thought here with respect to the scale of this event, horizon level event, something we've never seen before. What changes have come from 9/11 that make us better at managing novelty or horizon scale events? Sal or Chris, any thoughts on that? What make us better at managing novelty?
So, I mean, I think, again, looking at taking advantage of this crisis, before 9/11, really the fire service were the only ones on ICS. And post 9/11, we came out with NIMS, and it really was forcing everybody else to get onto that common system. Because what I always talk about is, we talk about the novel events, the unique events. We can't train for every particular thing that may happen, but if we're at least now on if we're all trying at least, I know not everybody's there yet, but if we're at least all trying to be on a common system, then whatever the event is, we can get through. If we have this collaboration and there's the cross-pollination of fire, police, FBI, whatever crazy event we can't even imagine today when it happens, we can get through it. You know, we never practiced for planes into buildings, but that's what happened, right? So whatever's going to happen tomorrow, who knows what it's going to be. But by being on that common system, by cross-training together, and by talking to each other, I'm not worried about it. Whatever presents itself in Texas, I'm not worried about it, because we've broken down those barriers between the state police, the FBI, the fire service. We're going to show up, and we're going to get it done. There's going to be a real unified command. We're going to be together, and we're going to get through it. And I think that's really a change in mentality. And there still has to be work there. I know that's not the situation everywhere. You know, there's still places where, hey, the police and the fire don't talk, and nobody likes it when we show up. So, you know, we're working on bringing that closer together, but we're a heck of a long way down that road than where we were.
Thank you very much. Now, looking at New York, we know that in the city of New York, significant events have taken place, many after 9/11 until now. And of course, you're not unacquainted with handling novel events, the Miracle on the Hudson, certainly Sandy, as well as other terrorist events. Did 9/11 prepare you to better manage those events or the novelty that you experienced, Miracle on the Hudson, or other significant events in New York City? Sal or Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. As Chris said, we learned after September 11th about certainly coordinating with all our partners, whether it was city, state, federal, and how important it was that we were all in this together. Mm-hmm. Nobody was going to solve these problems on their own. And we learned that, as Joe said, without having as much information as we should have at the Trade Center, not having the coordination between FBI and fire that they had at the Pentagon. And we've ensured that that won't happen again. Because through our partnerships that we forged, sometimes you had to push them along a little bit. Sometimes our partners weren't as cooperative as we thought they would be. But we learned. And if you have a very strong mayor that's going to back you up, that's helpful. If we train together so that the first time we meet isn't on the battlefield, that's extremely helpful. And that's, you know, the lessons that we learned from September 11th were carried out in many of the events that took place since.
One of the secrets we found out was an old French recipe, and that is to feed people. Matter of fact, I'd call it a firehouse recipe. So what we did in New York, I had a Center for Terrorism and Disaster Preparedness that wasn't at headquarters. It was an old Army base overlooking the water, the bay. And when we had interagency meetings, fire, police, emergency management, before the meeting or after the meeting, we had the people that was assigned to the center cook a good firehouse lunch. And we shared lunch together. And by sharing and breaking bread together, we were able to trust each other. And it is only through trust are we ever going to be able to work together. So I think it's going back to our roots in firehouses of sitting down and having a lunch or dinner, just breaking bread and building that relationship and friendship. Because what this is about, it's about bravery and friendship.
Thank you very much, Joe. Okay, let's now look forward. And we know with us we have current and future leaders of the fire service. And so let's think about what we must do to ensure that these future leaders think better about and are prepared to lead during 9/11 scale events. Jim, any thoughts on that? Let's speak to the next new fire chief, or in fact, chiefs that represent their agencies across the country. What must they be thinking to be prepared for the next horizon scale events such as 9/11?
Well, I give enormous credit for the preparations that we had made in Arlington and in the National Capital Region to a man who I don't think is here. When I spoke to him last week, I don't think he was going to make it. But our then fire chief, Ed Plogger, who I think was known to many people here in the audience and certainly throughout the association. When Ed came to Arlington Fire Department in the early 90s, he brought with him not just a curiosity, but an intention to do things beyond the traditions that we were probably, very much mired in at the time. And by that, I mean, he really got us to start looking not just nationally, but internationally, on what was happening in the world. We started talking about terrorism in the early 90s. Gary Breeze, who used to be the executive director of the IAFC, again, somebody who's known to many people here, was urging our business to start thinking about terrorism, as he had focused a lot on the problem in the Middle East. Ed, really, the attention-getting moment for Ed was the sarin attack in the Tokyo subway, which spurred him to encourage the National Capital Region to create some special capabilities that we did not have. And I think, his example of leadership, by not just confining his vision, his investment of time into what was happening in Arlington or even the NCR, but to look globally to see where threats might be emerging, and then ask ourselves, what would we do if that came here? And he really created in Arlington a DNA almost of, that kind of work. The second thing is that Ed's lack of ego, his, to, put a fine point on it, on September 11th, I was not the fire chief in Arlington, I was the assistant chief of operations. And when Ed showed up, when Chief Plogger showed up about 45 minutes into the incident, he came to the command post, and I went to do what all good number twos do. I went to hand him the vest. And he said, no, you're going to keep this. You're going to keep this because you do operations every day. You have these relationships, and I can be of more value to you if I keep all of the weight of the Department of Defense and the county and the everything else that's going to be happening off your shoulders. He adapted in the moment, right? He recognized that something we practice in ICS, which is who's best to fill a particular position, but he also made up a position for himself that became incredibly valuable over the course of the almost 20 days that we were there. So when you talk about leadership, I think it is about moving an organization to look beyond its own boundaries and then thinking about how that informs preparations. And then it is about developing the people that are best going to stand in those positions when the crisis occurs.
Thank you, Jim. And I want to come back to you in just one moment. And we'd be remiss if we didn't speak to the leadership that's been seen at the IAFC. And what I didn't mention is each of these gentlemen is a member of the IAFC's Terrorism and Homeland Security Committee. And that has been the case throughout the years. Tremendous leadership demonstrated there. And so, any brief comments on engagement with the IAFC and its committees and the importance of that for leaders in the fire service and in preparing them to lead in significant events such as 9/11?
Just briefly, I think the committee has put together some great products, starting all the way back with Mike Freeman from Los Angeles County when he was the chair of this committee. The development of the checklist, the terrorism checklist, which is just a phenomenal tool that is resonant, is completely applicable to our challenges today. The intelligence guide for fire chiefs, which is still out there. And then I think really important, it's, to get younger people that are up and coming in leadership positions in your respective organizations to start getting on these committees, getting in the sections, doing some of the work, because it's a great learning opportunity. It is a great career development opportunity. It is a great way to prepare the people that will replace all of us in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much. Other comments on engagement with the IAFC and its committees to prepare future leaders?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you have to have a good team. You have to build a team in your department. And no better way to build a team than to let them expand, let them go out and learn from other chiefs out there, learn from other experiences that people have faced that you haven't. Because it can happen in any city, in any place, at any time. While it may not be an event of a September 11th, it could be an active shooter, it could be a hurricane, we can go on and on. The way you're going to be prepared is to have a great staff to work with you, and they have to be trained. So let them expand, let them develop, and that team that stays together the longest is going to be the team that's going to be more prepared than anybody else.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Sal. Chris, we've undergone a remaking of key aspects of government, of course, in the light of 9/11. How do we keep moving in the right direction from your perspective?
I think we got to keep doing this. And, unfortunately, I would say 20 years plus, a lot of the after actions that I've been part of go back to the same issues. And, although people say 9/11 is 20 years ago, I can tell you that I've seen the same things with some of the active shooters that I've been involved with last year. And we have to keep revisiting that. We have to keep pushing the integration. We have to keep pushing the thought of the problem can be anywhere. As Sal said, hey, let's be honest, a 9/11 size event is probably only going to happen in a major city, but we're all experiencing active shooters. That can happen literally anywhere, no matter what size of your department. You look at Sutherland Springs, Texas, we had 26 people massacred in a church. That was a very small volunteer fire ambulance service. If it can happen there, man, it can happen anywhere. And, whoever you are, whatever size department you are, you've got to think like that, and we got to keep pushing that. And that's what I say. If Sutherland Springs can happen, it can happen anywhere. So every chief here has to think about that. What am I going to do? Am I prepared for 26 people massacred in a church? And how am I going to move that operation forward?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sal, we know that you rebuilt the FDNY. You helped rebuild a city, New York, nonetheless. So any parting words with respect to any jewels you'd like to leave with your fellow chief officers?
I think we've touched on this, but collaboration, building good partners, making yourself available as a department. If a job needs to be done, step up. Let the city depend on your department to mitigate an incident. And you become so valuable to the city, your resources will stay the way they are. They'll increase. People will depend on you. At every incident, whether it's a fire, naturally, collapse, active shooter, hurricane, tornado, wildfire, who do we see in the news? We see firefighters in uniform doing the job. Make your municipality depend on you. And the way you do that is to be prepared as best you can, be as cooperative as you can, and build those relationships. That's how we built the city and the department, through relationships. And many of your departments out there that came to help us after September 11th. I'm a huge believer in relationships and getting things done that way, and having a great staff as well.
Thank you very much, Sal. Joe, what are your final thoughts for this audience?
See, Mike always asks the tough questions at the end here. When I was writing my book, the editors asked the same thing. What do you want to leave your readers? So maybe I'll tell you one story that that I have in my memoirs. Matter of fact, is the reason why I entitled the book "Ordinary Heroes," because it speaks about all of us. December of 2014, the new One World Trade Center was rebuilt. And the Port Authority who runs the building asked me to come, and they were going to give me a tour of it. So I certainly accepted it, and it was kind of a weird feeling walking into One World Trade after all these years. The building was very pristine, looked beautiful. They took me up in a fast elevator, and I thought about, before then, I thought about that terrorism and 9/11 was not just an attack against New York or the Pentagon or in Pennsylvania or an attack against the United States. It was an attack against all of humanity. And 9/11 gave us a voice. It gave us the voice of all victims of terrorism. As you look at the four of us, we can say that we're a victim of terrorism, and all of you. But our collective voice is what's important. That we collectively can say that terrorism, whether international or domestic, is a crime against humanity. But my Port Authority took me to the top of the building, to the very top. We went out secure stairs, and then we climbed the metal exterior stairs to that ring right below the antenna. We were as high as we could go, and I overlooked New York and New Jersey, and it took my breath away. And then they asked me, typically what Mike's asking now is, can you leave us with something? Can you write something on the steel for generations to come? And I said, sure. And I thought a little bit. And I thought of two questions that people asked me after 9/11. The one question is, what is a hero? And my definition of a hero is one who does ordinary things, but in an extraordinary time. And that's what you heard of the stories today, and many more, of our firefighters and our EMS and our law enforcement doing ordinary things, but in an extraordinary time in history. But then I thought of the second question people asked, which was much harder. Matter of fact, it was the hardest question I was ever asked in my career, and perhaps my life. Because it comes from family members. And it's what every chief, every commander of any unit dreads to hear. They ask, why did my loved one have to run into the burning towers? Why did they have to run into danger? And it took me a long time to come up with the answer to that, because it wasn't enough to say it was our job. But the answer was right in front of all of us. We ran into the towers that day, into danger, at the Pentagon in Pennsylvania, so others may live. So I took out my marker and I wrote on the steel, always remember the heroes who did ordinary things, but in an extraordinary time, so others may live. And we continue to do that today, running into danger. And it's up to all of us to make sure we work together so the people that we send into danger can go home to their families.
Thank you very much, Joe. Well, Joe and Jim, Chris, and Sal, on behalf of this audience and also our online viewers, I'd like to thank you for sharing your personal experiences and perspectives with us this morning. And also thank you for your phenomenal contributions to the fire service, to public safety, homeland security, this country, and abroad, really. Certainly your contributions are tremendous and have made us better as a fire service and certainly in public safety writ large. So if you would please join me in a round of applause for our distinguished and incredibly special panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joe Minogue, retired FDNY lieutenant and NFFF FDNY liaison.
Good morning, everyone. What an amazing demonstration of individualism from the people sitting up here before us. So I would ask everyone to continue this ceremony with a memorial to 9/11, 20 years ago. So if you'd please stand if you're able, as the Charlotte Fire Department begins our ceremony. Thank you so much. If everyone could take a seat. And I'm going to ask the pipes and drums to play a song that we've heard many, many times, Amazing Grace. Thank you so much. A round of applause for the pipes and drums and the color guard, please. My name is Joe Minogue. I'm a retired lieutenant from the FDNY, and I'm currently the liaison to the FDNY for the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. One of the best parts about me being the liaison to the FDNY is I still stay in contact with the fire service, which is great. The other part is the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. 10 weeks before 9/11, Ron Sarnecki, the current executive director, became the executive director. And on 9/11, he assembled a team of professionals to respond to New York. One of those members are here in the audience today. From September 12th till this day, the foundation is still a partner with the FDNY, as well as a partner with the rest of the fire service in this country. When a department is in need for a line of duty or how to prevent a line of duty death or injury, the foundation is there for you, for your members, and the families who's lost a loved one. With our contribution to the FDNY, we unwittingly and gratefully has helped many departments around this country, first responders, firefighters, with the Counseling Services Unit responding to horrific events around the country, helping others. That is one of the growths that came out of 9/11. I was honored to work for Chief of Department Sal Cassano and later on Commissioner Sal Cassano before I retired. And he made a comment about relying on the people below you, because they're not truly below you, they're standing with you, and a leader recognizes that. The partnership with other branches of service highlighted today is where we are now. And in that, I would like to thank the San Antonio Fire Department, who's here today, because that's where this conference is going next. They helped us yesterday place 343 pictures of the FDNY members who perished 20 years ago on September 11th. They also helped us put up 253 members of the fire department who have lost their lives since. I want to thank everyone in this room, everyone behind the scenes, for making this memorial possible. When we work together, we can accomplish anything. So the FDNY, as well as the fire service, as we were talking, has come a long, long way. So there's a lot of positive things that we would like to highlight moving forward for our families, for ourselves. And what we've done with the foundation in partnership with the FDNY is produced a documentary looking at the growth and resilience of the FDNY. Why? Because it's a true story of commitment, of valor, of resilience. And everyone in this room can take that back to your family, to your community, and make a change, if you need to, of what we went through or what we learned. So I thank you for the time of being up here, and we're going to continue the ceremony. And I would like to acknowledge everyone around the country who has helped the FDNY move forward in our biggest time of need. But I also want to remember 3 communities that were affected. One is Pennsylvania. So if you're from Pennsylvania, could you please rise and represent Shanksville? If you're from the DC metro area, Arlington area, you please rise and represent those people, those families that were lost. If you're from New York, please rise and remember those people. Well, I ask at this point the rest of the audience to please rise for a moment of silence, if it's possible for you to stand. And 40 innocent lives in Shanksville lost. 125 lives in the Pentagon lost. 61 people that were in the air that crashed into Pentagon lost. That day, 343 FDNY members lost. 37 members of the Port Authority lost. 23 NYPD lost. Nearly 3,000 lives in the World Trade Center lost their lives that day. Thank you.
Let us pray. God in heaven, we thank you for all of the men and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice on 9/11. Now, God, we ask that the spirit of the sacrifice would not just live in our hearts and minds, but would be lived out in our daily lives, on and off the job. And God, we pray that this week you would continue to bless us and keep us. That you would make your face to shine upon us and that you would be gracious to us. That you would lift your countenance upon us, that you would give us peace, and that you would continue to protect us all as we serve your people, serve your world. We thank you for it all now. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.